Have you ever stopped to wonder how many people around you seem perfectly human on the outside, yet something is missing inside, as if they were merely empty shells, entities that walk and talk without ever demonstrating the depth of a true self? This unsettling hypothesis is not new. It has appeared in various traditions and perspectives, from ancient spiritual wisdom to contemporary philosophies of the mind. Helena Blavatsky, the central figure of occultism and founder of theosophy, once described this phenomenon in a disturbing way. Human beings who, in appearance, are identical to any of us, yet devoid of a genuine soul. She called them elementals, or human shells. Yes, they are born, smile, work, raise their hand to say goodbye, but they do not carry that divine spark that makes an organism truly conscious. Perhaps the strangest part is that you have probably already encountered them. You may have talked, debated, and even laughed with them without noticing any apparent difference in the way they act. Philosophy, in turn, refers to these hypothetical creatures as philosophical zombies or p-zombies, beings that perfectly mimic the actions of a conscious being but possess no inner experience whatsoever. It is an astounding question. Is it possible that there are people who appear to have emotions but deep down feel nothing at all? Over a century ago, Blavatsky claimed that not all humans possess real consciousness. Many function as automatic reflections, never experiencing subjectivity. In our days, David Chalmers revives part of this discussion when he speaks of the hard problem of consciousness. There is no guarantee that another really feels as I or you do. We could be surrounded by zombies without knowing it. The apparent humanity that hides emptiness. Think about it. If what defines consciousness is an internal state, something that only the individual can attest to, then there is no infallible method to distinguish a conscious person from one who merely appears conscious. And if Blavatsky's theory is correct, then perhaps many people around you are in fact mere cocoons. They walk, talk, react, but their interior is hollow, without the divine fire. Imagine looking at someone who smiles, cries, bursts into laughter, and delivers a passionate speech about something. Apparently anyone would say, this is a real person, feeling real emotions. Yet according to this view, it might all be nothing more than pure automatic acting. There would be no inner witness, only gestures, expressions, and empty words. Chalmers calls this a p-zombie, acting like a human being, but without subjective experience. Meanwhile, Blavatsky, in her esoteric vocabulary, long denounced that these beings, although they walk among us, are stripped of soul. You might even doubt, really, there is no scientific proof. But try to recall how many times you've talked to someone and had the feeling that that person was not really there. Perhaps there was a lack of depth in their gaze, or you noticed that their responses sounded robotic, like memorized speeches. Those conversations where you feel like you're talking to a wall, the person reacts, but does not interact on a genuine level, does not express authentic emotional vibration or real empathy. It is as if they were performing the role of human, but not truly living. In any case, the truth is that the discussion is no longer confined to 19th century occultists. In current science, there are studies that question the universality of consciousness. Neuroscientists have encountered strange cases of individuals whose internal narratives are practically non-existent. They do not have an inner monologue, do not reflect deeply, do not question their beliefs. What does that mean? That perhaps this state of absence of soul, in Blavatsky's vocabulary, is real for more people than we would like to admit. The world of automatons. Now consider modern society. How many people around you truly question reality? How many engage in daily self-reflection, analyze their own thoughts and emotions, investigate the origin of their beliefs and behaviors? And how many simply go with the flow, repeating patterns, embracing ready-made ideas, and acting on the most immediate impulses? It is not uncommon to notice people who wake up, work, consume, sleep, and repeat this cycle endlessly, never stopping to ask themselves, why do I do this? What is behind my choices? According to current science, many decisions we make, up to 95%, are completely automatic, almost as if an internal program had determined our course even before the conscious brain intervenes. What then can be said of those who never question anything? It is not an exaggeration to imagine them as systems operating in autopilot mode, playing a social role without diving into any depth. In Blavatsky's view, these individuals would be part of a soulless majority, emerging in times of spiritual decay. They are as if placed in the world precisely to maintain the grand illusion that we are all fully conscious when, in fact, awakening would be the exception. Very few would have achieved the state of integral living, uniting body, mind, and soul in true inner harmony. And if this is true, what does it tell us about social dynamics? People without soul, using Blavatsky's expression, would not carry out deep reflections or make authentic decisions. Basically, they would react, follow the pattern, imitate emotions, copy ideas they hear, acting as if they were inserted in an invisible script. And we, fixated on appearances, believe that those people are on a level of consciousness similar to ours. The terror of being unable to distinguish. This is the crucial point of the so-called hard problem of consciousness. Subjectivity is not something that can be measured in another individual. Only you know your own mind. Consequently, there is no foolproof test to say whether another is experiencing real feelings or is just a well-programmed human form faking sensations. And that is where the horror lies. What if most of the people we encounter do not actually possess an internal self? What if we are looking around and seeing spiritual automatons who do not think with their own mind? As absurd as the thesis may seem, modern neuroscience has already produced studies that indirectly reinforce it. Consider the case of split brains, where the two hemispheres of a patient are separated. In some experiments, each side appears to act as its own entity, even contradicting the other. This dismantles the notion that consciousness is something unified and stable. If a mere surgical cut in the corpus callosum can create two minds, or two halves of consciousness, then how many variations of consciousness might exist in the countless brains inhabiting this earth? And how many of them would function with such shallow activity that they barely even think? Moreover, many studies indicate that a significant percentage of people have no internal dialogue whatsoever. That is, they do not talk to themselves mentally, do not question, do not relive internal scenes with depth. From where, then, would their ideas come? Perhaps they are the direct result of conditioning, a social programming so strong that these people no longer feel the need to think, merely reproducing what they capture from the environment. Blavatsky drew attention to this point. Humanity is not equal in spiritual terms. Not everyone is endowed with a soul or has developed it. They are like shells without internal substance that occupy space, but live disconnected from the divine fire that gives true inner life. Society as a machine. Look around. We live in an almost mechanical system. School teaches you to memorize and repeat, not to reflect and create. Work demands discipline and production, not inner vision and self-knowledge. The media dumps information on you so that you react, not so that you reflect. Everywhere, structures are set up to keep the wheels turning. Where, then, is genuine autonomy? Blavatsky said that in times of decay, the number of these empty humans multiplies because the spiritual essence falls asleep or retracts in an environment that does not nurture it. Every time we allow ourselves to be carried away by habit, routine, without questioning, without feeling, without cultivating self-awareness, we run the risk of becoming part of this group. Reacting becomes natural, thinking becomes rare, and feeling deeply becomes almost impossible. If we reach this condition, then for those living in a state of spiritual zombie, there is no awareness that they are a zombie. That is the most despairing part. The person simply does not know. They operate on automatic mode, convinced that they are living, when in reality they are merely functioning. There is no self, watching, reflecting, or questioning. And because of that, it is useless to say, "You are a zombie." The system will protect you from doubt. It will despise anything that threatens the solidity of routine. The warning that few hear. You might ask yourself, if it is something so radical, why don't we know it clearly? But just observe. Various philosophers, neuroscientists, and thinkers have stumbled upon this same question. David Chalmers, when he speaks of philosophical zombies, is merely shedding light on a concept that Blavatsky was already disseminating centuries before. The difference is that she attributed a spiritual and occult nature to this phenomenon. Some bodies do not harbor the inner flame or have lost it due to inertia because of a lack of inner cultivation. Is it strange, then, that many of us, in deep conversations, notice the presence of people who only repeat what they heard on the news, defend ready-made ideas, and seem never to question the reality that surrounds them? It is as if someone were reading from a script. There are looks that reveal a vacuum, an emptiness, a kind of turned-off light behind the eyes, while lips recite arguments that do not truly belong to the speaker. And yes, that scares us. Perhaps it explains why many people do not think for themselves, are not interested in philosophy, spirituality, self-knowledge, or any form of transcendence. They live by appearances, by social patterns, by the uncritical repetition of traditions, not out of malice, but because they do not possess the spark that would lead them to question. Their state is one of involuntary obedience. They are what Blavatsky called personalities without a soul. The implications of awakening. If you caught yourself thinking about all of this, you might wonder, so, is there hope? Believing that most people live in a state of dormancy is disheartening. However, at the same time, this realization may be the first sign that you are not part of the sleeping herd. If this text speaks to your heart, if it awakens echoes within you, it probably means that you think, you feel, you question, but knowing is not enough. Living surrounded by those who do not think means that, sooner or later, the pressure to revert to autopilot will be enormous. Society is constructed in such a way as to reward those who do not question and punish those who break the mold. Those who criticize, who search, who break the pattern are often marginalized, ridiculed, or even attacked. And that leads many people to give up, falling back into the comfort of being just another one in the crowd, without the exhausting burden of being conscious. Blavatsky warned that this number of empty beings grows in times of spiritual and moral crisis, as the environment does not nourish the soul. Art ceases to inspire, religion turns into a mechanical rule, philosophy becomes a soulless academic article, and quick entertainment distracts everyone from their own interiority. In this atmosphere, it is easier to settle and not think. The call to awaken becomes increasingly rare. NPCs in a simulation? Some contemporary philosophers, such as Nick Bostrom, go further, suggesting that our reality might be a simulation. If that were true, it would make perfect sense that not everyone is a real player. In every complex game, most characters are not controlled by a conscious user, but programmed to act predictably. They are the NPCs, non-player characters. It is disturbing, but if you analyze it coldly, you might remember countless acquaintances who follow routines so automatic that they seem like software updates. From one moment to the next, everyone repeats a certain opinion, shares the same news, adheres to the same outbursts of indignation, and does not question the source. Their reactions are orchestrated as if a collective consciousness dominates them. Blavatsky in her time did not use the language of NPCs or digital simulation, but the concept fits. Human forms without a soul would occupy the scene to keep the social machinery running. And note that the current world embraces blind obedience, fear, consumerism, endless distractions. Everything conspires so that there is no space for deep self-reflection, for true awakening. How to know if you are also asleep? The most difficult question is not, are they NPCs? The most uncomfortable question of all is, what if I am one of them? Because no one likes to believe that they might be operating in zombie mode without knowing it. But the reality is that if you have never seriously questioned your beliefs, if you have always accepted what was told to you, If you live reacting but rarely creating from scratch, perhaps you are closer to a sleepwalker than you imagine. However, Blavatsky believed in the capacity for ascension. If you recognize this possibility, the possibility of being dormant, you are already halfway there. The simple act of asking yourself, "Am I awake?" indicates that within you there is a spark of living consciousness, a potential to tear away the veil. By definition, the majority never even asks that question. Many of us spend decades within a script so well adjusted that every step seems natural. Wake up early, go to work, follow orders, go home, watch something, sleep, repeat. On days off, consume more distractions. Or, on the weekend, drink to forget the stress. Repeat opinions, read in headlines. Believe that this is how the world works, and never think about it again. To break this cycle, self-vigilance is essential. Do you have a daily internal dialogue questioning the reason behind every reaction? When confronted with a news story, do you stop to reflect? Do you analyze to what extent your emotional response was programmed? When you get irritated, do you ask yourself where that irritation comes from and who benefits from your reaction? Do you seek to understand what deeply motivates you, or do you just follow the trends that everyone else follows? The system that doesn't want you to think. Perhaps the darkest part is realizing that society is not interested in your awakening. A lucid individual is a threat because they think for themselves. Do not get carried away easily. Do not reduce themselves to consumer impulses, and do not buy into any ready-made ideology. A person who questions may rebel, may denounce, may change the gears. Control depends on the conformity of the masses, who obey without resistance and follow the norm, even to their own detriment. For example, propaganda and news broadcasts are masters at triggering massive, simultaneous emotional reactions. They know that by bombarding you with fear or anger, your capacity to think freely is reduced. You become reactive rather than reflective. It is all part of a mechanism that serves to maintain the stability of a great machine, where the majority function as interchangeable parts. If one piece breaks, another takes its place, but the structure never changes. According to neuroscience, much of our brain operates in a default mode, accustomed to dealing with stimuli almost immediately. If there is no intentionality in the use of our mind, we fall into a kind of social trance that reinforces itself every day. And if you do not react consciously, you will simply follow the script given to you. Study to get a job, have children, pay taxes, consume until you die. And in the meantime, defend ideas that are not yours and feel emotions induced by the media. Is there a way out? It may sound fatalistic, but Blavatsky and other occult traditions believe that for those who want to awaken, there is always a path. It is neither a quick nor a pleasant process. It requires breaking emotional chains, challenging what has been taught, and facing the loneliness of thinking differently. And above all, developing an inner strength that does not depend on the approval of others. A person who begins to awaken discovers that they can no longer wait for social validation to move forward. Some may call you crazy, conspiratorial, or unbalanced. But if there was a moment when you looked around and noticed that something is deeply wrong, that much of the people seem to operate like emotional robots without any spark of self-criticism, then you have already taken the first step. It may not be an absolute certainty, but it is an intuition that corrodes the foundations of conformity. The NPCs and free will modern cognitive psychology also reinforces this. What we call conscious decisions often occur after the brain has already chosen. So, is our free will as broad as we think? And what if for some it is almost non-existent? What if certain brains function only as receivers of social instructions without questioning anything? Whatever the explanation, the result is the same. Men and women reacting to commands and scripts, believing they are deciding. Behind it, there is no inner self orchestrating every step. At least, not a free self. Everything indicates that this is the state of many background characters in society. They are not evil. They simply do not recognize themselves as free beings. And the lack of questioning deepens the process. When you are asked, "What do you feel?" is the answer programmed? Another way to perceive the soulless is when we question something emotional and receive a typically automatic reaction. Perhaps a cliché phrase like, life is like that, or it always was this way, so why complicate things? Nothing suggests that there was any real reflection. These are standard phrases that emerge to close the subject. The person shields themselves from any deeper analysis, like an antivirus that detects a threat. For Blavatsky, this behavior is indicative of someone who has not cultivated their inner light. The spiritual flame is asleep, almost extinguished, or it never ignited. The body remains alive, but the soul does not manifest. The person then lives as a biological instrument, eating, sleeping, talking, but their core remains silent, without growth. The dilemma of seeing the truth. When facing all of this, anguish arises. What do we do if the entire world seems inhabited by such beings? The answer begins elsewhere, in self-knowledge. If you feel discomfort at witnessing superficiality, it is a sign that your consciousness is awake enough to notice the difference. But from there on, you must strengthen yourself spiritually and psychologically so as not to fall back into the same torpor. Whatever your belief or practice, meditation, prayer, philosophical or theosophical study, or any form of inner search, the important thing is not to let your mind become complacent. Living on the edge between lucidity and automatic programming is exhausting. The system pulls us towards convenience, habit, and minimal effort. But it is in the act of critical thinking that consciousness finds its greatest chance to expand. Why does this cause so much discomfort? When we speak of people without a soul, many react with anger or denial. Saying that not everyone is conscious sounds elitist or even discriminatory. But it is not about judging anyone. It is about understanding that the possibility exists and that there are different degrees of awakening. Some live 100% on autopilot. Others are partially conscious, trying to free themselves. And then there are those who, according to Blavatsky, have reached high levels of enlightenment, although they are extremely rare. Most of us oscillate. On some days we seem alive. On others, we merely reproduce patterns. It is a continuous struggle. But for those who are not even aware that this struggle exists, there is no contest. They surrender to the flow. A spiritual epidemic. With the acceleration of the digital world, the tendency towards herd behavior becomes even greater. A catchy headline is enough, and millions share the same view or the same anger, often without having read the full article or questioned the logic. It is the copy-paste crowd of opinions, and this phenomenon grows exponentially. Social networks have become the perfect stage for the theater of zombies. Repetition of memes, hashtags, expressions of baseless revolt. Blavatsky said that in times of great confusion, these empty shells emerge en masse as the planet's spiritual energy becomes disturbed, and it is easier to be born or live without the awakening of the soul. For some, this may sound too mystical. For others, it makes perfect sense. In any case, the conclusion is the same. It is not safe to assume that everyone around you has the same depth of consciousness as you do. At every moment you come across people who, at the slightest intellectual or emotional challenge, close themselves off, utter standard phrases, and do not go further. And what if you do not fit in? Perhaps you feel out of place precisely because you notice the superficiality around you. You talk to people about profound subjects, but they quickly change the topic or look at you with bewilderment. You question beliefs, but the environment does not offer you a space for sincere debate. Deep down, you feel that there is something beyond appearances, but most seem uninterested in seeing it. This may be a clear sign that you are outside the statistic of the soulless. This, of course, does not mean that you are superior in an arrogant sense. It only indicates that you have an awakened component that, if nurtured, sets you apart from the tide of conformity. But this awakening comes with a price. The loneliness of not having anyone with whom to share certain reflections. And it is at that point that many people give up, preferring the security of the collective illusion. The scientific evidence that begins to emerge today, experiments in neuroimaging reveal tangible differences in the brains of people who practice introspection and deep reflection. While certain areas light up in introspective individuals, in others, almost no signs of activity appear when they are invited to reflect on their own subjective experience. This does not mean that they are soulless in a literal sense, but it points to very different levels of internal involvement. There are also studies on patients without an inner dialogue, who live in a flow of stimuli and reactions without formulating anything internally in words. This does not prove that they are zombies, but for Blavatsky, it would be an indication of a lesser connection with the divine spark, that inner voice that questions, feels empathy, and seeks to transcend mere repetition. Whatever the future scientific map may be, the idea that we are all equally conscious is already beginning to be shaken. Some researchers estimate that true self-awareness is much rarer than we suppose. And that reinforces the thesis that, at least to some degree, there are people living in a very shallow state of consciousness, almost like extras in a great theater. A world of extras. Imagine that we are on an immense stage. If the majority of those walking around are extras, background characters who only follow scripts, who are the protagonists? And what is the purpose of it all? If we go far enough, we will arrive at speculations that resemble science fiction. But even if you do not believe in a literal simulation, we can at least view social life as a grand theater, where few write their roles autonomously, while others merely recite lines. Blavatsky maintained that the objective of existence is to evolve spiritually, to wake up, to embrace the inner divinity. But, according to her, many cannot or do not want to make that journey. They end up serving as the mass for the scene, reinforcing patterns, maintaining old structures. They do not actively conspire against the light. They simply live without questioning, doing what everyone does. The danger of perceiving the truth and not acting now. If you are reading these words and feel a chill down your spine, it may mean that a part of you always knew. You always felt that the world is not quite right, that much of social interaction is superficial, repetitive, almost mechanical. Perhaps you even blamed yourself, thinking you were arrogant for seeing things that way. But deep down, it is simply a sign that your spark is alive. You sense the absence of soul in many around you. The real risk, however, is discovering this possible truth and doing nothing about it. Continuing life as before, interacting on the same shallow level, stifling the inner unrest. This neglect of oneself can cause you, little by little, to readapt to the state of dormancy. The environment exerts constant pressure. It is easier to be like the majority, to react and repeat, rather than to sustain the torch of lucidity. How to truly free yourself? There is no ready-made formula, but there are clues. Daily self-vigilance. Whenever you react to something, ask yourself if it is truly yours, or if you are merely repeating a pattern. Exposure to challenging ideas. The conscious being does not fear hearing the opposite of what they think, for they know that truth emerges from the confrontation of perspectives. Creation instead of mere reaction. Instead of just consuming, try to create something, be it text, art, projects, putting into the world a reflection of your inner self. Nurture your spiritual dimension, regardless of religion. Cultivate practices that awaken your inner life. Meditation, contemplation, prayer, theosophical or philosophical study. Careful selection of influences. Reduce the time spent exposed to empty distractions, manipulative advertisements, and content that only reinforces fear or passivity. The big question: who benefits from my state of mental sleepiness? There is always someone who profits when you do not question. Governments, large corporations, power groups, all thrive when the majority simply obey. If you awaken, that gear will tremble. Hence, there is so much force opposed to the individual who seeks to break away from the herd. A personal, non-transferable choice. In the end, perhaps the greatest lesson we can draw from Blavatsky's grim perspective and the reflections on philosophical zombies is that it is up to each individual to decide whether to cultivate an awakened soul. There is no possible coercion in this regard. Even if we shake someone by shouting, "Wake up!" If there is not even a seed of the search within, it is all for nothing. Similarly, if you feel this call, do not wait for anyone's permission. Start your journey of self-discovery now, silently if necessary, but with determination. The soulless will not recognize your quest because they do not understand what is at stake, and often you will feel alone. But loneliness is an inevitable part of awakening. Awakening in a sleeping world. We are faced with a scenario that many prefer to ignore, the possibility that much of humanity is not, in fact, deeply conscious. If that is true, then the implications are enormous. The world is not the great assembly of lucid minds that we usually idealize. It is more like a collection of programmed routines, repeated voices, inherited beliefs, all disguised as conscious action. On the other hand, if you have read this far, it is almost certain that you are not one of the zombies without a soul. Within you, there is something stirring, something that perceives, that reads between the lines. And this inner movement is living proof that true consciousness, although rare, exists. And if it exists, and if it can be expanded, you are not powerless. On the contrary, you are dangerously free to choose another path. The final question is, what will you do with this call? Will you continue acting as if you were just another face in the crowd, pretending not to see the superficiality that surrounds you? Or will you use this understanding to dive deeper into yourself, break the cycles of repetition, and become a beacon of light amid the darkness of collective unconsciousness? Challenge yourself. Comment. Question. Take a step further. Show that you are not following the automatic script. It is in this simple act of consciously interacting that the power of someone who is not an NPC is proven. This is how change begins when someone refuses to keep sleeping.